Hey guys, it's Dean. I know I kinda left off the last video implying that I was going to work towards Donkey Kong Country next. And well, that's still the plan. But before I move on from Mario and Sonic, I wanted to make one more video about them comparing how they closed out the 2D era and made the transition to the third dimension. Everyone likes to talk about 3D Sonic titles and joke about Sonic's rough transition to 3D, but I actually don't think the transition itself was all that bad. Also, I think Sonic Adventure was really good for a first 3D game in the Sonic series. Personally, it's always just felt like the fanbase talks about Shadow, Sonic 06, or even Heroes as Sonic's rough jump to 3D. But those games came out after Sonic had already made the leap, so I'm not sure how you can consider those part of his 3D transition. This video is going to be a bit different because I'm not really going to be talking about a specific game. This is definitely not my Mario 64 vs Sonic Adventure video. That video, or set of videos, will come in due time. But I'm not quite ready to spill all of my time, passion, and energy into the 3D era. I will, however, promise that I will eventually at least cover Mario 64 vs Sonic Adventure and Mario Sunshine vs Adventure 2. Beyond that, I'm not sure if it'll be a head-to-head as much as it'll just be videos on those various games in the series. We'll see. Anyway, over the course of this video, I want to go through how each of these iconic mascots made their transition to 3D. I know the general meme is that Mario just kinda successfully happened and Sonic tripped his way over to his rough transition, but in my opinion there's a lot more in common between their transitions than most people think. The first thing I wanted to look at is where both series ended during the 2D era. After the release of Mario World, you'd be forgiven to assume the next true mainline Mario game was Mario 64. But the 6-year gap between those two titles is too big to fully ignore. And while it might not be an official evolutionary trail that took us from World to 64, I think there are some observations worth discussing, even if some of them might be a bit of a stretch or just a personal reflection on the video games released. The first game I think is worth discussing today would have to be Super Mario Kart, released in 1992. Prior to the release of this game, console races were more of the types of games that just kind of scrolled towards a horizon and expected you to make a sharp adjustment on a horizontal plane to avoid obstacles. Coincidentally, this is exactly how Sonic Drift 1 and 2 played, and is likely the reason they're not really looked back upon fondly. With the technology of the SNES, Nintendo was able to design the game in a manner which allowed you to observe the area ahead of your racer in a much cleaner lens, giving you the time necessary to make adjustments throughout the course ahead of you. It's by no means a perfect game, and it does require skill and quick reflexes quite a bit, but it's more akin to a proper racer than what came before it. This game is the first title that I think you could start seeing Mario shift to the 3D space. There's a camera behind your character, a track ahead of you with multiple routes you can take. I mean, don't get me wrong, I see that the stages are flat, but it's not your typical side-scrolling platformer and your character can move around in an open space if you choose. Obviously you want to go straight around the track, but there's a bit more freedom in your movement than just going right or left and jumping. The next game I think is worth looking at is technically not even a Mario game at all, it's Yoshi's Safari. Yeah, if you thought it was a stretch that I consider a Mario Kart transition to 3D game, wait until you hear about what I have to say about Yoshi's Safari. This game was a third-person rail shooter that used a Super Scope light gun. But it does have you actually control Yoshi's movements and jump with a camera angle that follows behind him, which is a leap in the right direction towards being a 3D game. And I mean, if you really think about it, this easily could have been the model Nintendo based its evolution to 3D off of if they didn't go the collectathon route. If Mario decided to go the tunnel or hallway route like Crash Bandicoot did, it wouldn't be that crazy to call this game a predecessor of that playstyle. Some later linear Mario games follow a similar pattern as Yoshi's Safari in that it sees you in a 3D space on a fairly linear path moving towards the end of a stage and defeating enemies on your way. Games such as Mario 3D Land or even Super Paper Mario come to mind in this regard. In fact, during the jump from 2D to 3D, those were really the two options a 2D platformer had. You either designed a collectathon, which was the trend ultimately set by Mario 64, or you designed a game that contains levels that start and end at a specific location, which was ultimately what Sonic Adventure ended up adopting. So to quickly recap, if someone were hypothetically a Mario fan playing every game released by Nintendo in the early 90s, they'd have noticed Mario transition to 3D in an awesome racing game followed by a gimmicky rail shooter. A Sonic fan wouldn't have felt the same transition though, since there were no games in a similar regard. But to be fair, the two Mario games I mentioned came out while Sega was still releasing Sonic's Classic Era games. And in those Classic Era games, you could already see Sega experimenting with the third dimension. In Sonic 2 and 3 we got a glimpse of it in the form of the bonus stages. Sonic 2's half-pipe didn't really give you control of Sonic more than allowing you to just scroll left and right and jump. and Sonic 3 limited you to 90-degree turns. Sega CD, on the other hand, had you control Sonic in a 3D space, and it was basically the first time we got a feel of how a potential 3D Sonic could control. It's pretty clunky and really highlights how much we weren't ready for a 3D Sonic in the early 90s, but it's actually really cool seeing Sega's first attempt at giving you full control of Sonic in a 3D space, albeit on a flat bonus stage. Right around the mid-90s though, these two series started experimenting with the next logical evolution: the isometric view. Unlike everything I've mentioned above, I don't think it's a stretch to say the isometric games were the first true attempts at proper 3D titles. Sure, it included fixed camera angles, but that doesn't really determine whether or not a game is considered 3D. This part of the 3D transition is weirdly similar. Both series released these games as a send-off to their 16-bit console eras, those being Sonic 3D Blast and Super Mario RPG. Both of them used pre-rendered 3D models turned to sprites, a practice that had been made famous by Donkey Kong Country series, which, again, I'll be covering soon. Sonic's game was even ported over to Sega Saturn, which is underwhelming for the Saturn itself, but shouldn't take away from the fact that it's the definitive version of this game. And I did want to briefly mention the bonus stages in the Saturn version, which again were a display of what's to come in the future of 3D Sonic. The issue during the isometric era of games is that these series were just not fun to control in this manner. And the approach by each company to address this is what ultimately differentiates the perspective of these titles. Strangely enough, Mario went the RPG route, and ironically, Sonic went the way of the collectathon. Mario RPG had the experience of Square Enix for development though, so they knew how to make a good RPG. What's lost in general gameplay and controls in general for Mario RPG is made up for in the implementation of turn-based battles, beautiful scenery for the time, and a great story with memorable characters and enjoyable dialogue all throughout. If Mario RPG was built as a game where you just run around the map looking for things to collect with generic visuals and a lack of a proper story, well, that's what you'd get if you played Sonic 3D Blast. Now, I actually think the visuals in 3D Blast are not all that bad, and if the gameplay had been more enjoyable, it might have been forgivable. I think the checkered patterns are a nice callback to the 2D games, but it definitely would have been nice to have varying environments similar to Mario RPG. It's part of the reason why I think the Saturn version is definitive. But that being said, the game was just too empty. Mario RPG clearly benefited from having Square Enix on board. Even if you got rid of the turn-based battles, everything else about the game would lift it up. If you remove Square Enix, Mario's story would probably just be the same as the previous 2D titles, and well, the same as Mario 64's. This is something that I always thought was a little funny. Sonic 3D Blast contains a generic story without any characterization and relies solely on its gameplay for success as a collectathon. That's literally the exact same way I could describe Mario 64. But the difference is Mario's control in 64 was what made the game so successful, whereas Sonic's control in 3D Blast is what caused his downfall. And on the flip side, Mario RPG is a game with an in-depth story that takes itself a bit too serious at times, with memorable characters to paper over the cracks that is the control, and random gimmicks thrown in to change the controls up a bit and increase playtime, all the while being a spectacle, nice on the eyes, to make it more memorable, which is literally how I would describe Sonic Adventure. The isometric era is where I think these two series transitions ultimately differed. Mario's isometric game is remembered fondly to this day, while Sonic's is laughed at. Now, when it comes to the mid-90s, we all know how it went for Mario. Nintendo released Super Mario 64 as its launch title, and it was the end of their transition to 3D. It was an excellent inaugural game for a completely new style of play and a revolutionary title in the industry. 3D polygons were implemented, and Peach's castle and environments were all brought to a new light. Like I said, there will be a video where I eventually talk about this juggernaut, but it won't be today. I will say, however, that I absolutely love the 3D low polygon era of this generation, and I always dreamed of a Sonic game in this art style with these types of graphics during the late 90s. I don't know why I always thought about it. Not only did I never have a Sega Saturn, but I also don't know if I've ever seen one in person. I just remember a few of my friends in school had it, and it would always talk about it like it's the superior console. Lols. I don't think it's a spoiler to say we never got that title that I always dreamed about in that era. And really, Sega completely dropped the ball with the Saturn and couldn't keep up with Sony. Nintendo couldn't keep up with Sony either, but they didn't necessarily fail. I don't remember exactly when I got a PlayStation, but I know it was a few years after it released. But what I do remember is going to my friend's house and playing Crash Bandicoot. Crash Bandicoot's whole style of play is what I envision a 2D platformer to look like when it's over the shoulder. The hallway or tunnel play style that you run through to reach the end of the stage. Like I said, Yoshi's Safari was kind of experimenting this about 4 years earlier, but ultimately it wasn't implemented with any Mario game until Super Mario on the Wii, arguably. I remember as a kid when I saw the Crash Bandicoot games, I was always thinking it would be so cool if this playstyle was implemented. But I never associated it with Mario at the time, because Mario 64 was perfect to me in every way, shape, and form, and I didn't ever think about going back to linear level design, because I thought the open world collectathon was all we ever needed. Instead, I always wished there would be a Sonic game with this playstyle. I mean, think about it. Narrow levels requiring quick reflexes and shifts in your movement, platforming challenges, and bad guys blocking your path. It's literally been used to some extent in most 3D Sonic games, especially in the Boost Formula ones. And I know I'm not a game designer, but I think that era could have handled the speed and low polygons if they streamlined the levels and made them linear. The depth perception issue could have been fixed with a homing attack or a double jump, or really anything else that was strategically implemented during that era in other games. I genuinely think a game in this fashion released as a launch title for the Sega Saturn might have changed the course of Sega's history. The issue, however, is Sega like to take risks and aim higher than they're able to land. And I'm not sure why I'm saying that in past tense. They still do that. Instead, what happened was 4 main things for Sonic during the mid-90s. They cancelled Sonic Extreme, which I won't really go into since nothing was officially released. I'm sure Nintendo cancelled a bunch of other bizarre things during their transition to 3D, but it isn't as obsessed about because it's just not Sonic. Then there was Sonic the Fighters, which I could get into, but when it came out it was just an arcade title. There's not really much to say about it anyway in the context of this video, except that the character models were nice and it was barely played by anyone until it got ported over a decade later. I do like it, but again, not really relevant for this video. Which leaves us with Sonic Jam and Sonic R, both releasing in 1997. I actually think these two titles tell us a lot more about Sonic's transition to 3D than any other titles. Sonic Jam released slightly earlier than Sonic R, and contained what was a compilation of older 2D titles, excluding Sonic CD. This game was the OG Sonic Origins, a compilation released before it was cool and mainstream and it would make any hipster proud. It also contained a 3D space museum known as Sonic World. You were able to take full control of Sonic and run around a 3D space and interact with various objects. It's almost surreal seeing Sonic here. It kind of makes you think an open-world Sonic game could have been designed in this fashion, but also kind of highlights that maybe the technology, or really Sega, was not quite ready for that jump. Knowing them, they'd probably have just made another Sonic 3D Blast but with an over-the-shoulder camera instead of an isometric view. But regardless, seeing Sonic move around in this 3D space and those low-poly models is something I do dig. And if the Saturn wasn't a colossal failure, then Sonic Adventure could have looked like this. And it's not even like you couldn't use this as a template to design a fast-paced level, because the next Sonic game released was Sonic R. I, unironically, love this game. This is literally what I always wanted as a kid. Take Sonic, run around a 3D space, find a way to move faster, it's all there. Granted, it's a racing game, an unbalanced and crappy one at that, but that's besides the point. When I play this game, it feels like I'm playing a 64-bit era Sonic game, because that's basically what it was. It's just watered down with only 5 stages and not really set up with the badniks in the way it should be. But regardless, when I play this game and when I run around the Sonic world, I can see what Sega was looking for leading up to Sonic Adventure. Sonic World largely resembles what you'd come to expect from Sonic Adventure's 3D hub. And in many ways, it's more relatable to classic Sonic fans because Sonic and his surroundings match the art style many people loved in the classic era. And likewise, Sonic R looks like a footprint to what would ultimately be various levels in Sonic Adventure. A linear stage with a start and end point where you're trying to finish as fast as you can. I totally understand that it's easy to scoff at Sega Saturn. I never owned one, so maybe it's worth scoffing at, I'm not sure. But I did own a Dreamcast, and many people considered it a colossal failure. But I loved it, and I especially loved the Sonic games I played on there. So maybe if I had somehow ended up with a Saturn, I'd feel the same way. Maybe Sonic R and Sonic Jam would have been these amazing Sonic games I played as a 7 and 8 year old, and that I'd still smile at them fondly. I'm not sure, it's all hypothetical. But in hindsight, while during this whole transition there was a commercial failure for Sega, I don't think it's the fault of Sonic's transition to 3D. Here's the thing. Sonic has always had 2 primary disadvantages to Mario that he was never really able to shake off and probably still hasn't shaken off. The first is that Sonic started later than Mario. He always had to play catch up. When Mario was experimenting with rail shooters and God knows what else in the early 90s, Sonic was releasing its legendary classic games 5 or so years later after Mario had started releasing his. The other disadvantage Sonic has is his gameplay is significantly more demanding than Mario's. The speed and physics required to design a good Sonic game is so much more complex than what it takes to design a good Mario game. Now, I'm not by any means implying that Mario is easy to design or easy to control, but Sonic's control has always been what Mario does, but with more oomph. If you play the 8-bit Sonic games, they don't feel anywhere near as smooth to control as the 8-bit Mario games. It takes Sonic being in the 16-bit era to compete with Mario's 8-bit style. And again, because of what's required in 3D Sonic's movement, playing 3D Sonic in 32 or even 64-bit feels like playing Sonic in 8-bit. It's just clunky and reinforces that when it came to 3D, we needed Mario to set the path for Sonic to build off of. It's why I don't feel it's unfair to pair the classic series head-to-head despite Sonic's coming out later. And it's also why I don't think it's unfair that I'm eventually going to put Sonic Adventure head-to-head with Mario 64, despite Sonic coming out on a later console generation. I do think that in an alternate reality, Sonic could have shown on the Sega Saturn. If you took the style of Crash Bandicoot, mixed it with Sonic R, and threw in Sonic World as a hub world, we might have seen the Mario 64 rival from our Blue Hedgehog. Somewhere out there, there's a fan game begging to be made with the low poly design that is currently being obsessed over by gamers my age. And maybe if Sega was a bit smarter in the way they did things, that game would have been released by them in 97 or even 1996, and the Saturn would have flourished. But I think in typical Sega fashion, they bit off more than they could chew, and they started going towards what ultimately would become Sonic Adventure just a little bit too soon. And that's what resulted in Sonic Extreme being cancelled. And as a result, they couldn't release a big blockbuster they needed on the Sega Saturn. Now, all that being said, the whole point of this video was addressing the transition to 3D and whether or not it was actually as rough as the community claims it was. And well, it was a rough transition. But it wasn't a rough transition for Sonic. It was a rough transition for the entire industry. It took Mario almost 6 years to transition from Super Mario World to Super Mario 64. Have you ever looked at the games released during that time? All these educational and puzzle games and a freaking painting game that everyone holds in high regard. Yoshi's Safari is horrible. Can you imagine if Sega had released Tails Safari and the memes it would have created to this day? The space between Sonic and Knuckles and Sonic Adventure happened in less than 5 years. Almost 2 years less than what it took for Mario to go from World to 64. Mario completely beat out Sonic for the isometric games, but at the time Mario had only been 1 year away from 64 coming out, whereas Sonic was 1 year removed from Sonic and Knuckles. Here's the thing. Those transitions weren't as in-your-face back then as they are now in hindsight. For starters, it was all uncharted territory. We didn't even know what to expect with the 3D shift, so I'm not even sure the gaming community had any expectations while it was happening. The other thing is, and perhaps more importantly, between Mario World and Mario 64, and between Sonic and Knuckles and Sonic Adventure, we just kept playing the classic titles. That's how it was back then. A few years ago, I played Mario Odyssey. When I finished the game, I told everyone I knew that this game was legitimately the first time since Mario 64 that I think I got a true sequel to my favorite game, and that it was probably my new favorite 3D Mario title to this now. I beat it back in 2017. I 100% completed it before the DLC for Luigi's Balloon game even came out. I haven't touched the game since. Not because I don't like it, but because in the modern world of single-player video games, you play the next newest game, you beat it, and you move on. But back then, I played the ever-living heck out of the classic era titles. The game over and lack of saving sometimes made me go for years until I actually beat a game. And that's if I ever managed to beat it. And that's not even considered odd, it's what was the norm back then. I'd wake up on a Saturday, throw in Sonic 2 or Mario 3, play until it's time to turn the game off without saving it. And even with Mario World and Sonic 3's saving ability, you kept playing because there was always something new to discover. Some new area you never knew how to beat and you didn't have access to the internet to tell you how to move on. I realize this is kind of turning towards a 90s nostalgia fest, so I'll stop. But my point is that the quote-unquote rough transition to 3D everyone likes to joke about for Sonic wasn't really felt. And even when the jumps to 3D happened, we all enjoyed Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2. Everyone I knew did anyway. I didn't even know people disliked it until I started watching gaming YouTube videos in the mid-2010s. I know people like to blame Ant Dude and Some Call Me Johnny for Sonic's poor image, and while many think it's absurd, I kind of agree with it to some extent. Obviously, it's not just them two. Many other YouTubers and reviewers played a big role in this as well. When Mario Sunshine came out, a lot of us didn't like it. We felt it strayed too far from the formula set up by Mario 64. And for a solid 15 years, that's just what was accepted. Eventually, people started to defend the game, and many Mario fans went back to it and realized they were a bit hard on it. And now the general consensus is that it was a good game. That's generally how the cycle of a Mario game's fondness flows. The generation of Sonic fans that have closely kept up with your typical YouTubers, however, go back to these old adventure games that were loved and start to rewrite history and claim they weren't good in the first place. Finding the smallest details to critique, while going on about how Sonic Mania was the best Sonic game ever made. And look, I like Mania as much as the next guy. But can you imagine the Mario fanbase claiming Mario Maker was the best Mario game ever made? And Mario Maker objectively has more going for it appealing to Mario fans than Sonic Mania does to Sonic fans. In the past couple of years, I've been seeing similar remarks towards Mario 64, and it upsets me because it's not the way of Mario fans. 3D World was released on a failed console and we all scoffed at it, but I love that I've seen a fanbase defending it to the point where it's considered one of the greats now. And even back then, when we thought it was generic, we still all bought it and legitimately had a great time playing it. And likewise, I love that so many Mario 64 fans have recently started coming out of their caves and talking about how amazing Mario 64 is. Effectively shutting down the possibility of modern hater fans rewriting history and turning it into a crappy outdated title, like the Sonic fans did with the adventure games. Luckily, I do think there's hope for the Sonic fanbase, and it largely is coming through the Gen Z populace. Sonic Unleashed, Sonic 06, and even Shadow to some extent are being defended. People are seeing the good in these games and not obsessing over every minor detail as much. And I mean, look, these games obviously aren't perfect, and in many ways they are downright broken, but they don't deserve the amount of hate they get. I remember not too long ago Sonic Heroes got the same amount of hate, and now it's no longer considered the start of the bad Sonic games. One day, hopefully sooner rather than later, I'll go through all of the 3D Mario and Sonic games. Not because I want to make content to hate on them, but because I know I'm going to legitimately enjoy replaying all of these games, flaws and all. At their worst, they're a glitched, fun game with characters that I love in them. And at their best, they're some of the best games I've ever played. And I don't mean to absolve Sonic Team and Sega from the blame of what they've faced, because really, they dug their own graves over the past 20 years. Actually, gosh, it's like closer to 30 years now. But the generation I grew up with, the play it loud generation, the one that grew up not only obsessed with Sonic, but obsessed with console wars, obsessed with insulting Nintendo fans, obsessed with this ride or die attitude that it's Sonic or bust, the ones born from the mid-80s to the early 90s. They're the ones that had a rough transition to 3D. They took their miserable perspectives and forced them down everyone else's throats in an era where doing so gets you clicks and subscribers. And as a result, Sonic suffered. Significantly way more than he deserved. As always, thanks for watching. Dean out.